Imagine being 17 years old, your father's favorite son, wrapped in a coat that screams privilege to everyone who sees it. Then imagine your own brothers stripping that coat off your back, throwing you into a pit, and selling you to slave traders heading to a foreign land. This is not fiction. This is not a parable. This is the true story of Joseph, son of Jacob, recorded in the book of Genesis. A young man who went from favorite son to forgotten slave, from prison cell to second in command of the most powerful empire on earth. But here is what makes Joseph's story so extraordinary. It was not luck. It was not coincidence. It was not even Joseph's own brilliance, though he possessed remarkable gifts. It was God orchestrating events so intricate, so perfectly timed, that 20 years of suffering would become the means by which an entire family and the covenant line would be preserved. By the end of the story, you will understand why Joseph, standing face to face with the brothers who destroyed his life, could say these words: "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Stay with me, because this is a story about dreams, betrayal, false accusations, forgotten years, and the moment when everything God had been preparing comes together in the most unexpected way possible. Joseph was born into a complicated family. His father Jacob had worked 14 years to marry Rachel, the love of his life. But Jacob's other wives, Leah and the concubines Bilhah and Zilpah, had already given him 10 sons by the time Rachel finally bore Joseph. This made Joseph special from the moment of his birth. He was the firstborn of the beloved wife, arriving after years of her barrenness and desperate prayers. Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other children, and he did not hide it. Genesis 37 verse 3 tells us plainly that Jacob made Joseph a richly ornamented coat, a tunic of many colors that set him apart from his brothers who wore the plain garments of shepherds and laborers. This coat was not just clothing. It was a statement. It signaled that Joseph would not be working in the fields with his brothers. It marked him as the heir, the favored one, the son who would receive the blessing and the inheritance. The result was inevitable. Genesis 37 verse 4 says his brothers hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. The Hebrew word for hatred here is intense, describing a hostility so deep they could barely stand to be in his presence. The resentment festered like an infected wound. Joseph had dreams, vivid prophetic dreams, and he told them to his brothers. In the first dream, they were binding sheaves of grain in the field when Joseph's sheaf stood upright and all his brothers' sheaves bowed down to it. In the second dream, the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to him. Even his father rebuked him for this one, though Genesis 37 verse 11 notes that Jacob kept the matter in mind, pondering what it might mean. His brothers, however, were done pondering. They hated him all the more for his dreams and for his words. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were grazing flocks near Shechem, a considerable distance from home. When his brothers saw him coming from far off, before he even reached them, they plotted to kill him. Genesis 37 verse 19 records their bitter words. "Here comes that dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of these pits. Then we will say a fierce animal devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." This was premeditated murder, driven by years of jealousy and rage. Only Reuben, the oldest brother who bore responsibility for them all, tried to save Joseph's life. He suggested throwing Joseph into a pit without harming him, secretly planning to rescue him later and return him to their father. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers seized him, stripped off his ornate coat, and threw him into an empty cistern. Then, in an act of shocking coldness, They sat down to eat a meal while their brother cried out from the pit below. Years later, in Genesis 42, verse 21, his brothers will remember his anguish, saying, "We saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, but we would not listen." While they ate, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders appeared on the horizon, traveling toward Egypt with spices, balm, and myrrh. Judah had an idea. "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother, our own flesh." So they pulled Joseph up from the pit and sold him for 20 shekels of silver. Joseph was taken away, watching his brothers disappear behind him, heading toward a land whose language he did not speak, whose gods he did not worship, whose customs he did not know. Everything he had known was stripped away in a single afternoon. The brothers took Joseph's coat, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the garment in blood. They brought it to their father Jacob with a question designed to break his heart. "We found this. Please examine it to see whether it is your son's robe or not." Jacob recognized it immediately. "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Genesis 37 verse 34 tells us Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused comfort, saying, "I shall go down to Sheol to my son," mourning. The brothers, of course, were among those offering comfort, living a lie that would haunt them for over 2 decades. Meanwhile, Joseph arrived in Egypt and was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Here is where the story could have ended in bitterness and despair. A teenager ripped from everything he knew, enslaved in a pagan land, with every reason to rage against God and his circumstances. But Genesis 39 verse 2 contains one of the most important statements in the entire narrative. The Lord was with Joseph. God's presence came first, then everything else followed. The text does not record Joseph's prayers or his tears or his inner wrestling. What it does record is that Joseph worked with excellence, remained faithful to the God of his fathers, even surrounded by foreign gods, and that his master Potiphar noticed something different about him. Potiphar saw that the Lord caused all that Joseph did to succeed. So he made Joseph overseer of his house and put him in charge of everything he owned. God's blessing on Joseph overflowed to everyone around him. The Egyptian household prospered because of the presence of a Hebrew slave. Joseph was well built and handsome, and after some time, Potiphar's wife took notice of him. Day after day, she pressured him to sleep with her. Joseph refused consistently with words that reveal where his heart was anchored. Genesis 39 verse 9 records his response. "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Notice he did not say sin against Potiphar, though betraying his master's trust was certainly part of it. Joseph's primary concern was not getting caught or losing his position. His concern was sinning against God. This reveals his character even in Egypt, even as a slave, even with no community of faith around him to hold him accountable. But Potiphar's wife was persistent. One day when the household was empty, she grabbed his garment and demanded he sleep with her. Joseph fled, leaving his garment in her hand, and ran outside. Once again, Joseph lost a garment. First, his brothers stripped off his coat of many colors. Now, a scorned woman holds his cloak, and once again, that garment will be used as false evidence against him. Potiphar's wife was enraged by the rejection. She claimed Joseph had tried to assault her, using his garment as proof. When Potiphar heard the accusation, his anger was kindled. Joseph was thrown into the king's prison, the place where Pharaoh's prisoners were confined. Everything Joseph had worked for, gone. His reputation, destroyed. His freedom, taken. He was now not just a slave, but a convicted criminal in an Egyptian dungeon. Some scholars note that Potiphar's response seems measured. The typical punishment for such an offense would have been immediate execution. Instead, Potiphar imprisoned him. It is possible he suspected his wife was lying, but could not publicly contradict her without shaming his household. Regardless, Joseph was in prison. But Genesis 39 verse 21 says the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. The pattern repeated. The keeper put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners, and whatever was done there, Joseph did it. Joseph continued to work with integrity and excellence, even in a dungeon. After some time, Pharaoh became angry with two of his officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and imprisoned them where Joseph was held. One night, both officials had dreams that troubled them deeply. In ancient Egypt, dreams were taken very seriously and required professional interpretation. When Joseph saw them the next morning looking distressed, he asked why. They explained they had dreams, but no one to interpret them. Joseph's response in Genesis 40 verse 8 is significant. Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me. Joseph did not claim personal power to interpret dreams. He pointed them to God as the source of all understanding. The cupbearer dreamed of a vine with 3 branches that budded, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes. In the dream, he squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and placed it in his hand. Joseph told him the 3 branches meant 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh would restore him to his position. Then Joseph made a request. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit. This is one of the rare moments where Joseph speaks about his own injustice. He was stolen from his homeland. He had done nothing to deserve prison. He asked for help. The chief baker, hearing the favorable interpretation, shared his dream. He had 3 cake baskets on his head, and birds were eating from the top basket. Joseph delivered hard news. In 3 days, Pharaoh would hang him on a tree, and birds would eat his flesh. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, everything happened exactly as Joseph said. The cupbearer was restored, the baker was executed, and the cupbearer forgot all about Joseph. Genesis 40 verse 23 says, "Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." Joseph remained in prison. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. Genesis 41 verse 1 begins with a time marker. After 2 whole years. 2 more years Joseph sat in that prison, after interpreting the dreams, after asking for help, after hoping for release. We can only imagine the crushing disappointment, the fading hope, the questions that must have filled the darkness. Then one night, Pharaoh himself had 2 dreams that disturbed him greatly. 7 healthy, plump cows came up from the Nile, followed by 7 thin, ugly cows that devoured the healthy ones, but remained just as thin. In the second dream, 7 plump ears of grain grew on one stalk. Then 7 thin, scorched ears sprouted and swallowed up the good ears. Pharaoh woke troubled and summoned all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. But none could interpret the dreams. That is when the cupbearer finally remembered. He told Pharaoh about the Hebrew slave in prison who had interpreted his dream accurately 2 years earlier. Pharaoh immediately sent for Joseph. Genesis 41 verse 14 says, "Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. He shaved himself and changed his clothes and came in before Pharaoh." Notice the speed, quickly. After years of waiting, suddenly everything moved rapidly. Joseph was cleaned, shaved according to Egyptian custom, dressed, and brought before the most powerful ruler in the world. Pharaoh said to him, "I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph's response is crucial. Genesis 41 verse 16 records it. "It is not in me." God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Once again, Joseph deflected glory from himself to God. He did not claim personal power or wisdom. He pointed Pharaoh directly to the source. Pharaoh recounted both dreams. Joseph listened, then delivered the interpretation with clarity and confidence. The two dreams were one. God was showing Pharaoh what he was about to do. 7 years of great abundance throughout Egypt would be followed by 7 years of famine, so severe it would consume all the abundance and ravage the land. The doubling of the dream meant the matter was fixed by God, and God would shortly bring it about. But Joseph did not stop with interpretation. He offered counsel. "Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint overseers to take 1/5 of the produce during the 7 plentiful years, and store it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine, so that the land may not perish through the famine." The proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." In a single moment, Joseph went from prisoner to prime minister. Pharaoh removed his signet ring and put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him in garments of fine linen, put a gold chain about his neck, and had him ride in his second chariot. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered Pharaoh's service. 13 years had passed since his brothers sold him at age 17. 13 years of slavery, false accusation, imprisonment, and waiting. But God elevated him in a single day to a position of absolute authority, second only to Pharaoh himself. Joseph administered Egypt during the 7 years of abundance, storing grain in quantities beyond measure. Then the 7 years of famine began, exactly as God had revealed, and the famine was severe in all lands. But in Egypt there was bread, because Joseph had prepared under God's direction. When people cried to Pharaoh for food, he told them, "Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, do." The famine covered all the earth, including Canaan, including the land where Jacob and his sons lived. When Jacob learned there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's only full brother and the new favorite, fearing harm might come to him. The brothers arrived in Egypt and came before Joseph to buy grain. They bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them immediately. But he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" They answered, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." They did not recognize him. The last time they saw Joseph, he was 17, wearing simple clothing, speaking their language, pleading for mercy. Now he was 39, clean-shaven in the Egyptian style, dressed in royal linen, speaking through an interpreter, holding absolute power over their lives. Joseph remembered his dreams, the ones his brothers hated him for, the dreams of their sheaves bowing to his. Now here they were, faces to the ground before him, and they had no idea. Joseph accused them of being spies. They protested, insisting they were honest men, 12 brothers originally, with the youngest at home and one who was no more. Joseph imprisoned them for 3 days, then announced a test. One brother would remain in prison while the others returned home. But they must bring back their youngest brother to prove they were telling the truth. The brothers spoke among themselves in Hebrew, not realizing Joseph understood every word. Genesis 42 verse 21 records what they said. In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us. They believed their current suffering was divine justice for what they did to Joseph 20 years earlier. The guilt had haunted them all this time. Joseph turned away from them and wept. He took Simeon and bound him before their eyes, keeping him as hostage. Then he commanded his servants to fill their sacks with grain, return every man's money to his sack, and give them provisions for the journey. When the brothers opened their sacks, they discovered their money had been returned. Their hearts failed them, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" They returned home and told Jacob everything. Jacob cried out in anguish, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me." Reuben offered his own 2 sons as collateral, but Jacob refused. "His son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left." But the famine continued. Eventually, the grain ran out. Judah reminded Jacob they could not return without Benjamin. Jacob finally agreed, telling them to take double the money, return what was found in their sacks, and take gifts of the best products of the land. "And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man." The brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he told his steward to bring the men to his house and prepare a feast. The brothers were terrified. They explained to the steward about the returned money, insisting they had brought it back. The steward, likely instructed by Joseph, reassured them, "Peace to you, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you." Then he brought Simeon out to them. When Joseph came home, the brothers presented their gifts and bowed down to him. He asked about their welfare and their father. "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" They answered, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. Joseph looked up and saw Benjamin, his mother's son, his only full brother. He asked, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. He entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out. Controlling himself, he said, "Serve the food." The men were seated before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. The brothers looked at one another in amazement. How could this Egyptian official know their birth order? Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. They drank and were merry with him. Then Joseph commanded his steward to fill the men's sacks with food, put each man's money in his sack, and placed Joseph's silver cup in Benjamin's sack. As soon as morning came, the men were sent away. When they had gone only a short distance, Joseph sent his steward after them to accuse them of stealing his silver cup. The brothers were indignant. "Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Behold, the money that we found we brought back to you. How then could we steal silver or gold? Whichever of your servants is found with it shall die, and we also will be my Lord's servants." The steward searched, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. The cup was found in Benjamin's sack. The brothers tore their clothes in grief. They loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. When they came to Joseph's house, they fell before him to the ground. Joseph said to them, "What deed is this that you have done?" Judah answered, "What shall we say to my lord? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are my lord's servants, both we and he in whose hand the cup was found." They knew they were not guilty of stealing the cup, but they believed God was holding them accountable for their guilt against Joseph 2 decades earlier. Joseph replied, "Far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." Then Judah stepped forward. "Oh, my lord, please let your servant speak a word." He recounted their father's love for Benjamin, how Jacob had lost one son of his beloved wife Rachel and could not bear to lose the other. Judah explained that his father's life was bound up in the boy's life, that if they returned without Benjamin, their father would die of grief. Then came the climax. "For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father." This was the moment. Judah, who had suggested selling Joseph into slavery, now offered himself as a slave to save his brother. The transformation was complete. The brothers who had once cared nothing for their father's grief now could not bear to cause it. Joseph could contain himself no longer. He cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept aloud, and the Egyptians heard it, and Pharaoh's household heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers could not answer him, for they were terrified. Joseph said, "Come near to me, please." They came near, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here." Listen carefully to what Joseph says next, because these are the most important words in the entire story. "For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt." Joseph said God sent me 3 times in this speech. The brothers sold him, but God sent him. They meant evil, but God meant good. This was not Joseph minimizing their sin. Later he will acknowledge plainly that they meant evil against him. But Joseph had come to see God's sovereign hand at work, weaving even their evil intentions into a plan of redemption. Joseph urged his brothers to hurry back to their father and bring Jacob and all their households to Egypt, where Joseph would provide for them during the remaining 5 years of famine. He fell upon Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. After that, his brothers talked with him. The news reached Pharaoh's house, and Pharaoh was pleased. He told Joseph to command his brothers to bring their father and settle in the best of the land of Goshen. Joseph gave them wagons, provisions, changes of clothing, and sent them away with one final instruction: do not quarrel on the way. They went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in Canaan. They told him, "Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." Jacob's heart became numb, for he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words of Joseph, and when he saw the wagons, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." So Israel set out with all that he had. Genesis 46 records that 70 persons in all came to Egypt belonging to Jacob. When they reached Goshen, Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Joseph settled his family in the land of Goshen and provided food for his father, his brothers, and all his father's household. Israel lived in Egypt 17 years, reaching the age of 147. When his time to die drew near, he called Joseph and made him swear to bury him not in Egypt, but with his fathers in Canaan. Jacob blessed Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, crossing his hands to give the greater blessing to the younger. Then Jacob called all his sons together and prophesied over each of them. Concerning Joseph, he said, "Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall." The archers bitterly attacked him. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above. The blessings of your father are mighty. May they be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. After Jacob died, Joseph's brothers feared that with their father gone, Joseph would now repay them for the evil they had done. They sent a message to Joseph. Whether this accurately reflected Jacob's wishes or whether the brothers fabricated it out of fear, the text does not say. The message claimed Jacob had commanded Joseph to forgive them. They came before Joseph and said, "Behold, we are your servants." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers fell down before him once again. But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. This is the statement that defines Joseph's entire story. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Joseph did not deny his brother's sin. He acknowledged plainly that they intended evil. But he also saw God's sovereign hand weaving even their evil intentions into a plan of redemption. The pit, the slavery, the false accusation, the prison, the forgotten years. All of it was part of God's design to position Joseph in the one place where he could save his family from starvation and preserve the line through which God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would continue. This was not fate. This was not luck. This was the providence of God. Joseph lived in Egypt 110 years. Before he died, he told his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." 400 years later, when Moses led Israel out of Egypt, he took the bones of Joseph with him, fulfilling the oath. Joseph was eventually buried in Shechem, in the very region where his brothers had plotted to kill him. Joseph's story is ultimately about how God works through broken people, broken families, and broken circumstances to accomplish his purposes. Every act of betrayal, every injustice, every year of waiting was woven by God into a larger plan to preserve the covenant family through which the Messiah would eventually come. The connections to Christ are profound. Joseph was loved by his father, as Jesus is the beloved son. Joseph was rejected by his brothers, as Jesus was rejected by his own people. Joseph was sold for silver, as Jesus was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Joseph was falsely accused, as Jesus faced false witnesses. Joseph was numbered with transgressors, as Jesus was crucified between two criminals. Joseph was exalted to the right hand of power, as Jesus was exalted to the right hand of the Father. Joseph saved his family and the nations from physical starvation, as Jesus saves his people from spiritual death. Joseph forgave those who meant him harm, as Jesus prayed, "Father, forgive them." Joseph's life points forward to the ultimate story of redemption, where God took the greatest evil ever committed, the murder of his own son, and turned it into the greatest good ever accomplished, the salvation of all who believe. The cross was the ultimate expression of "you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." What the enemies of Jesus intended for destruction, God intended for redemption. What looked like defeat was actually victory. What seemed like the end was actually the beginning. Here is what Joseph's story teaches us. God's presence sustains us through suffering, even when circumstances do not change. The Lord was with Joseph in the house, in the prison, and in the palace. Faithfulness in hidden places prepares us for greater things. Joseph served with excellence when no one was watching except God. God's timing is perfect, even when it feels painfully slow. 13 years passed between the pit and the palace, but God was working even in the waiting. Forgiveness does not minimize sin, but entrusts justice to God. Joseph acknowledged his brother's evil intent plainly, but he chose to release them, trusting God to settle all accounts. Our greatest pain can become the means by which God blesses others. Joseph's suffering positioned him to save thousands of lives. Finally, God is writing a bigger story than we can see in our moment of suffering. When Joseph was in the pit, he could not have imagined standing before Pharaoh. When he was rotting in prison, he could not have foreseen ruling Egypt. We see chapters. God sees the whole book. If you are in a pit today, if you have been betrayed, if you are serving faithfully with no recognition, if you are waiting for promises that seem delayed, if you are suffering injustice and wondering where God is, Joseph's story speaks to you. The Lord is with you. He has not forgotten. He is working in ways you cannot yet see, positioning you, preparing you, weaving even the painful threads into his greater design. The pit is not the end of your story. God is not finished. He is still writing, still working, still using even evil for good, still bringing life from death. Trust him in the darkness. Serve him in the waiting. Forgive those who have wronged you. The same God who was with Joseph in the pit and the prison and the palace is with you right now, writing your story into his greater story of redemption. Your suffering is not meaningless. Your waiting is not wasted. God is at work, even now, preparing you for something you cannot yet see. The God who brought Joseph through can bring you through too. He is working all things together for good according to his purpose. Hold on. Keep believing. He is faithful. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoy living and inspiring biblical stories, subscribe to Living Bible Stories channel so you don't miss new videos. We'd appreciate your like and comment. It really helps the channel grow.